Good evening, my friends. Welcome. So, the story is told about a man named Robert Fallon in the year 1858. He was playing a game of poker with his friends. His friends suspected that he cheated when he won the $600 pot. So, they shot him dead. Then they were trying to find someone to take his place. No one wanted to touch those $600. So, they found another person who was standing in the bar, and they said, "Hey, would you like to come play with us? We're missing a player. Come in. You can start off with $600." He says, "Sure, I'll come and play." And so he starts to play the game together with them, and sure enough, he turns the $600 into $2,200 in 1858. That's a lot of money. Sure enough, as he's having a great winning streak, the police roll up, and they're investigating what happened over here. And in their ruling, they said that the remaining money can remain here on the table with the player, but the original $600 won by the person who was shot needs to be returned to his heir, to one of his inheritors, to his child. How are we going to find his child? They start to compare information. What was his name? Suddenly, this person who was just invited to the table to play with this group, he pops up and he says, "Hey, that's my name. What was the name of the person who was killed? Him? He's my father. And I haven't seen him in 7 years. He's been a criminal. I've lost touch with him." The $600 ended up exactly where the police had asked for it to, together with his own son. What are the odds of such a story? There's another story, a little more famous. In the year 1914, how did World War I break out? At least what was one of the pretty direct causes to World War I? The story goes that Bosnia had just become part of the Austrian Empire. Yet the group of young Bosnian Serbs who were disappointed with this move, they decided they're going to get back at this. And they're going to assassinate the heir to the Austrian throne, none other than Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And Franz Ferdinand was scheduled to be in the provincial capital of Sarajevo, and they decided they're going to assassinate him. A group of 7 people armed to their teeth with guns, with bombs, with grenades. And they knew that he's going to be in a motorcade going down the street. And so they positioned themselves properly. And at the right time, one of them took out a grenade and threw it. Now, the grenade was an old grenade. It took about 10 seconds to explode. By the time it exploded, the Archduke's car had already moved on. And the car behind him, or one of the cars behind him, they ended up being blown to bits. I don't think the people there were killed. I think they were severely injured. Well, now the plans were ruined, and these attempted assassins quickly scrambled and ran away not to be caught. But one of them decided, "I've really got to catch this guy." Well, what should we do? We've lost our chance. So he decides, "I'm going to go down the main street." I forgot what the name of the main street there was called. And he goes to Moritz Schiller's Delicatessen to order some lunch for himself. They say he ordered a sandwich. Now, in the meantime, the Archduke had gone to the capital to give a meeting there. And then he asked, instead of taking his original route back to his hotel, he wanted to change his route to go visit the wounded in the hospital. His driver was a fairly new driver and lost his way and got stuck in the middle of the city. And sure enough, reached that main road where the traffic was bumper to bumper. And the car stopped right outside this delicatessen. Well, one of the assassins, eating his sandwich inside the delicatessen, looks outside and he sees the car and he sees the face of the Archduke himself. He couldn't have a better vantage point and position to do what he wanted to do. He took his gun and he fired 2 shots. One shot killed the Archduke's wife, and the other shot killed the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And it's that, eventually, through a series of events after, which led to the outbreak of World War I. I'm telling you these stories because they're really amazing coincidental stories. If you will do a Google search, and you'll find the most amazing coincidental stories in the world. You have a couple of these stories, and there are plenty more. But this leads us into tonight's topic, and that is, are there any coincidences? Did it just happen? How did it just happen, all come together in such a perfect, unexpected way? Tonight is part 3 of the biggest Jewish ideas series, and we're studying providence. Providence, commonly known as divine providence. In Hebrew, it's called hashgacha-pratis, the way that God oversees and orchestrates everything going on in the world. That's a general term. There's another more nuanced term, which we're going to talk about tonight, called hashgacha-pratis. The word pratit means something a little more individualistic, a little more detailed, a little more specific, describing the level of nuance and specificity, how God does oversee and orchestrate the world. Is this truly the case or not? How do you want to live your life? Does everything that happen, is it just random? Does it just happen because of the forces and elements of the universe that string things together in its own way? Or is there a higher power that is governing, that is controlling, that is managing, micro managing everything that's happening? And when we talk about everything that's happening, we're not just talking about humans or the people around us. We're talking about all humans around the world. We're talking about all animals around the world. The Kabbalah talks about the 4 kinds of creations. There are the 4 levels of creation. There are the humans, then there are the animals, then there are the plants, and then there's the inanimate realm. All of it, every blade of grass, every grain of sand. A grain of sand moves from here to there. The wind blows it. Did it just happen? Because that's what winds do. And where did the wind come from? Or was it by design? Was there a kind of intelligent design that created the world, and not just created the world, but continually orchestrates the world in that way? That is the conversation that I want to have with you tonight and present the traditional Jewish view. There's a number of different views we're going to present tonight. Some more, we're going to get into more Kabbalistic views, more recent Hasidic interpretations of the spiritual masters of this view. And what we're going to walk away with is a really profound paradigm about how all of this actually works and how to understand divine providence in a very deep, life-changing way. Let's make a l'chaim, let's make a toast. If you're able to sponsor and dedicate a class, one of these series or the entire series, there's a link in your video description, and that will help us continue doing what we are doing. So, l'chaim. Now, we could take for a moment God out of the picture, if you want to. Some people prefer to do that. So there's no God. There's no God, meaning, again, when we use the God word, I want to be very careful because the God word is for some people a very meaningless word, or we're talking about a higher power, divine orchestrator, something, some entity that runs and controls the universe in a very cohesive, unified way. Now, we may say no such thing exists, and everything exists on its own. How does everything happen and function? There's a natural order to the universe. Everything has its pattern, its orders, its cycles, its orbits. And starting from millions of miles out there, the celestial beings and their orbits coming down into our atmosphere, into our world, and all the various cycles of the wind and of the sun and of the waters and the waves and the moon and the atmospheric pressures and all of these things up until the very close things to us, our homes and the streets around us. It all just comes together in its own special way. Which really, therefore, says there's no exact meaning or purpose why anything is happening other than this is the kind of cause and effect, the kind of natural state of evolution, how things are. Scientists talk about the chaos theory, right? Where something in one end of the world that may be very slight can have a huge impact on another end of the world. So, for example, the flapping of a butterfly's wings in one end of the world can cause eventually, after many weeks, months, or who knows how long, a hurricane or a tornado on the other side of the world, because that's the cause and effect system. And the way when a movement or a change is made in some place, some realm of the atmosphere, here it can cause, as a domino effect, all kinds of things all over the world. If you believe this way, then here's an important thing to keep in mind. Chas v'shalom, heaven forbid, a very close loved one of yours is crossing the road and unfortunately does not look left and right or right and left properly, where it depends where they're living. And a car is speeding down the road, turns the corner, and boom, crash into this person and kills the person on the spot. What's the first question you want to ask? The first question everybody wants to ask is, why? Why did this happen? So I have a very simple answer. What do you mean, why did it happen? There was a car on the road. It was speeding, going at a certain pace. Based on the pace it was going, scientifically, even if it saw something coming up really close to it, it would have to step on the brakes. And we know how the brakes work based on the design of this car. And it takes X amount of seconds to actually slow down in a pace that's not going to kill the driver. And here you have a negligent pedestrian who wasn't looking, absentmindedly, thought it was safe, crossed the road, the two collided with each other. It's all a mathematical formula, and boom, the end of the story. The person was killed. No. The person says, I'm not asking for the science behind this, for the formula behind it. I'm asking, why did it happen? What do you mean, why did it happen? I just told you why. Put all the data together, put the kind of road that it was, and the kind of car, and the kind of day, and the temperature, based on the inflation of the tires. And I mean, get into all of the very scientific specifics, and there's your answer. That's why it happened. But I want to know why. If a person does not believe in a God or in intelligent design or in some higher power orchestrating everything all the time, then why simply is not a good question. It's not a correct question. There is no why. Why? The question of why is often asking for what purpose, for what reason, what motivated this in terms of why was it allowed to happen. But you can't ask that question if you don't believe that there's any design or purpose to the universe. Which is why, even if you don't believe, it's a hard thing not to believe, because everybody wants to know, that wants to believe that there's a kind of why, there's a kind of purpose. There has to be something motivating, causing everything to happen. So let's go to the other way around. I'll actually present that view. There's a very famous passage in Maimonides' Moreh Nevuchim. The Moreh Nevuchim was one of the classic philosophical works of Maimonides, the guide for the perplexed. Many of you have heard about it. Not so many people have actually studied it. It's a hard book to study in its original language for sure, but even in its translations, it's a very ancient work. But there, the Rambam writes the following. He says, there are 5 different theories concerning divine providence. They are all ancient, known since the time of the prophets, when the true law was revealed to enlighten these dark regions. The Rambam's in this passage is dedicating to describe different views on divine providence, on what kind of connection does Creator have with the creation, what kind of relationship, what kind of ongoing management does the higher power have with the universe. So in his first theory, he says as follows: there is no providence at all for anything in the universe. All parts of the universe, the heavens and what they contain, owe their origin to accident and chance. There exists no being that rules and governs them or provides for them, which is the view that we described earlier. This is the theory of Epicurus, says Maimonides, the great Greek philosopher, who assumes also that the universe consists of atoms, that these have combined by chance, have received their various forms by mere accident. And then he goes on to say how Aristotle proved the absurdity of this theory, that the whole universe could have originated by chance. He shows that, on the contrary, there is a being that rules and governs the universe. So among Greek philosophers, this too was heavily debated, and the idea that everything is subject to mere accident and chance was very heavily criticized by not just Jewish philosophers or spiritual masters, but also by some of the Greek philosophers as well. But let's get into the other side of the story. Let's say we do believe in a God. Now I'm getting into the Jewish view. Again, this God is some kind of higher power, some kind of creator, the origin, the source of all existence, who created all of existence, who brings everything into being. And the question is, once this thing brings everything into being, what is the relationship between creator and creation. Now, before I get into several views about this, I want to say that as a way for us to better or easier understand this conversation tonight, because it's going to get pretty deep, is we're going to use the metaphor of a CEO of a company. Now, when I say CEO, that can also mean many things, which is good because we're going to be describing different kinds of CEOs in this company. But so the CEO will use the term to mean the boss of the company, might be the founder of the company. That would be a more appropriate analogy to God who created the universe. But the CEO is in charge of ensuring every single part of this company, no matter how large it is, how many layers, how many departments, no matter how tall the hierarchy, at the end of the day, from the smallest menial activities to whether the cleaner was there at nighttime vacuuming the office, to the highest decisions of budget and expenses and deals that are closed, et cetera, at the end of the day, the CEO has to put his stamp of approval behind everything. He bears responsibility for it all. He may not micromanage it all. He may macromanage. He may hire many other managers to be in charge of various things, but he carries the last responsibility of everything that happens. This is our Mr. or Mrs. CEO. We're going to use this metaphor to understand the various views of the grand CEO of the entire universe. So, we believe that this world was created. We discussed this in part 1 of the series. And it was created something from nothing. Everything that exists by virtue of the force, the creative force of the creator. We therefore believe in intelligent design. And that basically means that the creator was not some silly entity, just doing things in a state of drunkenness or negligence, but the creator had a plan, had a purpose when everything was created. And how many things are there in this world? Billions and billions of species and different kinds of animals and insects and humans and things and minerals and down to the very lowest layers of the atomic and subatomic worlds, gazillions and gazillions. Everything was created with a plan and with a design. This world is not a jungle. This world is not chaos. This world is not anything goes and whatever goes. Rather, everything is precise. Everything has its place and its time and its role in the universe. This includes, of course, humans, but not only humans, every other existence as well. That is the general principle. God is the CEO. If the CEO is responsible for everything that happens in the company, then this creator is responsible, is on top of everything that happens in this universe, in all of creation, in all of the universes, both physical ones and spiritual ones that we're aware of, we're told about. Now, we have the following teaching in the Talmud that supports this. Is a very interesting teaching in Avodah Zarah, page 3b. The Talmud there asks a funny question. What does God do all day? Isn't he bored? It's like what people ask. What does the CEO do all day? Why is he getting paid in 7-8 figures? Some people ask, what does the rabbi do all day? So if the Talmud answers the question, doesn't shrug off the question, you're not allowed to ask such a question. Here is the answer. There are 12 hours in the day. For the first 3 hours, the Holy One, blessed be He, sits and engages in Torah study, education, reading, studying, very important. For the second 3 hours, He sits and judges the entire universe. Like our CEO, looks over the documents, the paperwork, looks over the numbers, looks over the files, making sure that everything is adding up. During the third set of 3 hours, the Holy One, blessed be He, sits and sustains the entire world, from the horns of wild oxen to the eggs of lice. In other words, from the biggest thing, like the wild oxen, or think about the mammoth, for example, to the smallest lice in the universe. This God for 3 hours is managing. This is the source that tells us that every single creature and creation in this world is being managed on some level by the CEO. And what does God do in the fourth hour? In the fourth hour, He sits and plays with the Leviathan, the Leviathan fish. So He does some recreation and exercise. King David in Tehillim, chapter 147, verse 9, says, God gives the animal its food, and to the young ravens which call out. Again, another beautiful description of a young raven. Who in this world has time to think about a young raven? We've got people to think about, my business to think about, my family to think about, my community. There's so many more important things. But the CEO is concerned even for the smallest thing. That being said, with that introduction, what kind of CEO is the creator? The first view I want to share with you is the view of Maimonides. Let me pull it up for you. This Maimonides is the same chapter, the same passage in the Moreh Nevuchim I was reading earlier, and after presenting various views which he disagrees with, he presents his own view. Maimonides writes, listen carefully. My opinion on this principle of divine providence, I will now explain to you. In the principle which I am now proceed to expound, I do not rely on demonstrative proof, but on my conception of the spirit of the divine law and the writings of the prophets. The principle which I accept is far less open to objections, is more reasonable than the opinions I mentioned before. It is as follows. In the lower or sublunary portion of the universe, divine providence does not extend to the individual members of species, except in the case of mankind. It is only in this species that the incidents in the existence of the individual beings, their good and evil fortunes, are the result of justice in accordance with the words, for all of God's ways are just. But I agree with Aristotle as regards to all other living beings, and a fortiori as regards to plants and all the rest of earthly creatures. For I do not believe that it is through the interference of divine providence that a certain leaf drops from a tree, nor do I hold that when a certain spider catches a certain fly, that this is the direct result of a special decree or will of God in that moment. It is not by a particular divine decree that the spittle of a certain person moved, fell on a certain gnat in a certain place, and killed it, nor is it by the direct will of God that a certain fish catches and swallows a certain worm on the surface of the water. In all these cases, the action is, according to my opinion, entirely due to chance as taught by Aristotle. In other words, says Maimonides, I believe that there are different levels of this divine providence that God has, the CEO of creation has, and it's split up on humans and the rest of creation. Humans receive divine providence upon every single individual human and every single particular aspect of their life. What they do get, what they don't get, when they get it and how they get it, how easy it is or how difficult it is, their troubles, their tribulations, their rewards, their punishments, their good fortunes and their misfortunes. Everything that is centered around the human being is by divine decree, is by the direct command, will, and management of the CEO of the Creator. However, when it comes to all other creatures, animals, plants, insects, and in the inanimate world, the water and the minerals, those are not subject to this level of management from the CEO. Rather, the CEO has a more general oversight of what's going on over them. As the Rambam said, if you heard it, he said, God is managing their general species, but not managing the particular members, the individual members of each species. I'll read out for you a quote from a very famous Kabbalist. His name was the Shomer Emonim Rabbi Yosef Al-Gassi, who says a similar view. He's quoted very much with regards to these matters, and he writes, there are three categories of existence in this world which do not receive reward or punishment. Think about that. Reward or punishment means that, and this is coming from the heavens, from the Creator, it means there's a Creator that's directly reacting to and responding to and aware of and interacting with your ongoing activities in life. The good behavior gets rewarded and the poor behavior gets punished. But there's three categories of existence that do not get rewarded or punished: animals, plants, and inanimate objects. He says they are watched over each of the species as a whole. However, no specific providence determines whether a particular ox will live or die. There is no providence over a particular animal, how much more so not over a particular plant or inanimate object. For their intent in their existence is merely for the species as a whole. And here he draws one interesting exception, which I don't want to get carried away with, but unless their existence concerns man. For example, should a person's chicken be seized by a hawk, divine providence does not concern the chicken in its own right, only in so much as it is the human's property. God created a species called chickens, a species called fish, many different kinds of fish, a species called oxen, grass, plants, palm trees, right? So God wants these things to be in his world for whatever reason. Each one has their purpose, but the purpose is the general species. The purpose is not this particular animal or this particular tree. This particular tree is not necessarily significant or important and therefore known about or overseen by the CEO. I want to know that there are palm trees in the world, whatever goodness they bring to the universe, whether they're pure, whether trees are purifying the atmosphere, or all their carbons and chemicals that they're releasing, or the kind of fruits or bounty they're providing to whatever it is. But this oxen in general should be in the universe. They come to use. But this ox, whether it's going to get sick, it's going to die, it's going to find water and not be hungry and thirsty, or it will be hungry and thirsty, or get attacked. This lion will attack this animal, this crocodile attacks this thing. You watch the Natural Geographic. I mean, I watch them all the time. I can't get enough of it. This snake attacks this. None of that is on record. None of that is being scripted. That's all happening because of a natural order that was put into the universe. Except if it belongs to me, so then it's my oxen. So then there is a very specific, careful attention being paid to me as a human being, whether I have owned 5 oxen or I just own 4 oxen, and that's my assets and my wealth. So therefore, it is clearly decided if my ox will die or will be stolen or whatever, because it's relevant to me, not about the ox. But in general, if they're in the wild, let nature take its course. This is the view of, famously quoted by Maimonides. Now, there's a very famous passage from the Sefer HaChinuch, Reb Aaron of Barcelona, 13th century, who is referenced to many times. He talks about the concept of extinction. We know now, in the past couple centuries, scientists have done a lot of work with extinction. I think recently there was a large list of many species that are projected to become extinct in the next X amount of years. And if you talk about, they look at the last 1,000 years of creation or more of the world, and they see so many different kinds of species that have become extinct, animals, plants. There is a view by the Sefer HaChinuch over here who says that because God's divine providence is at least on the species of animals, therefore he says, I'm reading a verbatim, no species will ever become extinct from all the species of creatures, as it is due to the providence of the living and existing forever. May he be blessed that their existence is found. If God creates oxen, it's because they need to be in the world. They can't become extinct. No species can become extinct. That's just an interesting takeaway from this concept of a divine providence on the species. How to particularly understand this concept in light of recent science, I'm not sure. I think there's a number of ways to explain it. Whether it's maybe at some point in time, God decided this world can do without this species. So then there's a God approval, or part of God's management is to sideline, to take away that position in the company. Or maybe, by the way, there's a lot of discussion in the scientific world that a lot of extinct as species which are declared extinct, all of a sudden it's not 100% clear, and there's a sighting of a particular animal. There's many such cases. Many years later, there's been a sighting, and so it's very hard to determine all over the world that something is truly extinct. I'm open to suggestions, and I don't want to get carried away with this right now, but that is the view of Maimonides and others. Now, there was another view. This view is most famously attributed to the Baal Shem Tov, the great Hasidic master, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, 300 years ago, although he claims he didn't originate it and he accepted it from previous philosophers and spiritual masters as well, but he really addresses it in great detail. And he writes as follows. He says, God's providence governs every minute creation. A fallen leaf that has been tossed over and over by the wind, or a bit of straw which someone used when thatching a roof some years ago to move them from one place to another. A storm wind breaks out, shaking heaven and earth in the middle of a warm, sunny day, and brings to fulfillment the divine providence that governs this small, stray leaf and old wisp of straw. The movement of a single blade of grass in the depths of a forest, on a stately mountain, or in a deep valley where man has never passed, to its right or to its left, throughout its entire life, is determined according to divine providence. God, blessed be He, has decreed that a particular blade of grass will live for a specific number of months and days and hours, and during the duration of this period it will turn and bend a certain number of times. Furthermore, I'm going to read quickly this last sentence, but we're going to get back to it at the end of today's class. He finishes off as follows. Furthermore, the movement of this particular blade of grass affects the creation in its entirety, allowing God's intent in the creation to come to fulfillment. The Baal Shem Tov disagrees with Maimonides. And he says this kind of hashgacha-pratis, individualistic, particular attention and management of creation, does not only apply to the human realm, but it applies to every single created existence, animals, plants, and the mineral world. Every blade of grass. His colleague, the famous Rabbi Pinchas Shapiro of Karetz, writes, one must believe that even when a straw falls to the ground, it's the result of a divine order. I heard from my saintly master, the Baal Shem Tov, that the divine decree even ordains whether the straw should be placed in this direction or in that direction. There's a couple of sources for this, in fact, from the Talmud. There's a very famous passage in the Talmud, Chulin, page 63a. The Talmud says, when Rabbi Yochanan would see a certain waterfowl, as it's, you know, when you see those videos, they're diving into the water to catch a kind of fish. It could be the eagle, the hawk, whatever it is. It's such a glorious, so beautiful to watch Mother Nature, right? So when he would see that in action, he would recite the verse that says, your judgment is fulfilled in the great depths. And he would bring the commentary of Rashi that says, even in the depths of the seas, you have brought this waterfowl, this shalach, to execute your judgment upon the fish, to kill those who are intended to die. He's not talking about the species of waterfowls or the species of fish. He's talking about this particular occurrence, that you had this bird at this time, on this day, dive into the water in this location and catch that particular fish. It was all meant to be. The Jerusalem Talmud says a bird is not snared unless there is a decree from heaven. Even a particular bird is being watched over by its creator. There is a passage in the Talmud, Babylonian Talmud, that says every blade of grass, there's not a single blade of grass in the world. And how many blades of grass are there? Gazillions and gazillions. There should be more. It's very pretty to beautify our world. There's not a single blade of grass that does not. The only way that it grows is because there's an angelic force, a creative force of God that is tapping it, that is fueling it, and it's commanding it, gadol, gadol, grow, grow. Not the species of grass. Every blade of grass. I want to read out to you or tell you over a story. A beautiful story. I think I have it here. Oh, here we are. This is a story told by Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, known as the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, passed away in 1950 in New York. He was the father-in-law of his successor, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, used to write a diary, especially many occurrences that he had with his father, who was the Rebbe before him. His name was Rabbi Sholem Dovber, the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe. So he writes that in the summer of 1896, I was strolling with my father in a field in the country resort of Balivka, near the city of Lubavitch, where they lived. The crops were almost ripe. The grain and the grass rippled in a gentle breeze. The Rebbe wrote so beautifully. My father, he says, he was the Rebbe, he was teaching me, and he turns to me and he says, look, my dear son, godliness in front of your eyes. Every movement of each single ear of grain and every blade of grass was included in the primordial thought of God's creative process. Divine Providence causes this thought to be realized for the sake of a specific godly intent. That was the teaching of the father. As we walked on, he says, we were in the forest. I was in deep contemplation of what my father was teaching me, and he spreads, I was overwhelmed by the gentleness and earnestness of my father's explanation. As people often do, as children do, I was walking with my father. Absent-mindedly, I stretched out my hand and I plucked off a leaf from a tree. My father turned to me very angry, very disappointed, and he said that the great Kabbalist, the Arizal, teaches every leaf is a created being with divine vitality, which God created with a specific intent and role in the ultimate purpose of creation. We were just discussing the subject of divine providence, and you go ahead without any thought and you pluck a leaf, hold it in your hand, play with it, tear it into pieces, scatter it in various places. How can a person act so light-mindedly in relation to one of God's creations? Today, in science, we know about the some kind of consciousness that the leaves have, that the plants have, that the grass have. They have a language, they have a song, they can sing, they communicate. We have some knowledge of some level of awareness of plants. So, when you pluck a blade of grass or a leaf from a tree, think about what you're doing. Think about the kind of life that you're severing there. How much on a deeper level to think about that there's a divine vitality, there's a soul, there's the creative force of the creator in that leaf right now, giving it life, making it exist, making it grow, making it alive, and you sever it that way. What are you doing? How are you harming, in a way, God's world, God's creation? Even a single leaf. Another story. According to the Baal Shem Tov, every event in the physical universe has a purpose. Once, there was a scoffer of the Baal Shem Tov who decided to follow a leaf which was twirling across a street. Yeah. In Miami, we don't have this, but in many places in the world right now, it's the fall. The leaves are turning brown and red and yellow and gorgeous colors. They're falling off the trees. A wind comes and blows a whole lot of leaves, and they blow and they scatter from garden to the street. Is there any point in that? Is there a purpose of that? So one scoffer of the Baal Shem Tov said, let me prove to the Baal Shem Tov that the fact that the leaf went from here down to there is of no significance, no importance, no design, no plan. It just happened. So he followed the leaf over many blocks until the leaf stopped and rested. He said to himself, why is it here? Because it's here, not for any particular reason. But then he bent down and looked under the leaf. And sure enough, there was a dying, thirsty, hot baby worm baking in the heat of the day. Now this little leaf was providing the worm with shelter and food, thus ensuring that the worm would not perish. And when he told it to the Baal Shem Tov told him it's much more than you can even imagine. Since the beginning of the universe, before the world was created, when in the primordial thought of the creator who was planning out everything in all of existence, it's many years, thousands of years, millennium of gazillions and gazillions of things and people and trees and plants and animals and insects. And this infinite God thought about that one day, at this particular time, in this particular place, there's going to be this baby worm who is hungry and hot and thirsty and dying. And we're going to be able to get a tree from nearby, maybe it's a kilometer or a mile away or down the block, and it's going to be during the fall, so we're going to send the wind and make the weather a particular way, that it should rain or it shouldn't rain, and the wind should be a certain way and flow in a particular direction. And with that amount of wind and flight, the leaf will be able to breeze in a certain way and travel here and there and turn over and finally eventually land on this place at the right time, in the right place to help this worm. All of this was planned. Could you imagine? This is an unbelievable concept. Sometimes hard to understand. Definitely not intuitive. Definitely not something we think about all the time. We think about big things that are planned by God, even as a believer. Yes, of course, who I'm going to marry and the kind of job I'm going to get and the kind of family I'm born into and the education and the city where I live and my health and these big decisions that I have, these, of course, are orchestrated by plan. But as I'm driving down the road and that there's a particular thing that is here and it goes there outside, the fact this is lying around, the weather is a certain way, it does rain, it doesn't rain, there is a puddle, I do get wet, this person slips, that one doesn't slip, whatever the circumstance of the most minutest details and insignificant importance is all by plan. That's what the Baal Shem Tov teaches. Now, probably some of you are sitting here and you watched, I think it's the first or the second class a few weeks ago, and you're saying, yeah, of course, it's obvious. It's obvious because of a teaching that we taught 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, we taught the idea that the world wasn't just created at the beginning of creation, but rather the world is continually being created all the time. When you create something from nothing, when you create something that is unnatural, it needs to be constantly fueled in order to be. And if there's no fuel of life going into it, making it be, it reverts to its natural default, which is non-existence. We discussed that at great length. Go see the class over there. So for this leaf, or for this worm, or for this wind, or for whatever it is, for this person, for this animal, to exist right now is because there's an active process, there's an active force, creative force of the Creator in it right now. And that means there's a very strong awareness of this as well. Think about the Rambam. In the Rambam's view, the CEO, right, let's get back to the CEO. The CEO is he micromanages, the heads of many departments. Every single day or every single week, he meets with the head of this department, that department, that department. So the heads of the department are very closely watched over and is in constant conversation and touch with them all the time. Emails and texts and phone calls. What's going on lower, down below? And I don't know. I don't know the particular person that's hired to make this coffee and clean this room and manage this site over there. That's not the CEO's business. That just happens. That happens. I make the rules. I make the principles. I lay down the budget. I lay down the policies. And then you and your department will figure out how it happens. I'm not aware of, and I'm not connected with, the particulars, the small details in your department. I've just created the big laws and policies that can make that all happen. That's the Rambam's view. Humans versus the rest of creation. According to the Baal Shem Tov, we're talking about a CEO that invests him or herself, their time, their effort, their awareness, their management on such a micro level. Now, this is maybe not a very good model for a CEO. Don't be so micro, let people do their thing, delegate responsibility, etc., etc. But when it comes to the Creator of the universe, this is the way he operates. To the minutest detail of the smallest mosquito or grain of sand. It is created. It is being created right now. And if it's being created, it's because it's supposed to exist right now in this place, in this time, serving its particular role. And its next moment, and its next moment after that, and its future, and its various changes are all being decided and planned all the time. Now, okay. Got a lot more I want to share. We'll see how deep we can go. I'm aware of the time over here. I want to share one more distinction between these two views, and then I want to conclude with a fascinating idea, metaphor, takeaway from all this and bring it all home. Okay? There's actually another distinction between the view of Maimonides and the view of the Baal Shem Tov. Not only do they disagree by saying that the Rambam says that the hashgacha-pratis, the individualistic particular attention, is given to all humans. With regards to everything else, it's about the awareness of the species. The Baal Shem Tov says, no, the hashgacha-pratis, the individualistic particular attention, is given to every single creation. Not only is that the distinction, but also when it comes to humans. There's a difference even in the realm of humankind. This is a really interesting idea. Listen to this. The Rambam writes, and I'm reading out what he writes. Divine Providence does not rest upon all humans equally. The degree of providence extended to an individual will increase in proportion to his superiority in the perfection of his human qualities. As to the fools, low-level people who rebel against God, their interests will be loathed and will be controlled by the natural order, as are those of the animals. Not all humans are the same. It depends on the level and the accomplishments of the human being. The Shomer Emonim, the great Kabbalist that we quoted earlier, also writes a similar thing. Particular attention is not granted to all men. In this context, he refers to the principle of Hester Panim. Hester Panim means the hiding of God's face, stating that at times, because of a person's sin, God will abandon him to the natural order and circumstance. I'll explain in a moment. The Baal Shem Tov disagrees. He says there's no hierarchy here between humans, high-level humans, lower-level humans, but rather the Baal Shem Tov teaches a more encompassing perspective. God identifies with every being and every phase of those beings' existence. There is nothing, not even the most minute particular, which is apart from God. Just to share this concept briefly, and we'll go into it more maybe another time. Maimonides often referred to God as, how do you describe the Godhead? So he often referred to the Godhead as supernal wisdom. What's the highest thing in the world? The greatest thing which we could think about that the Creator would be? Well, within ourselves, the highest capacity of the human is wisdom. In fact, that's what differentiates a human from a non-human. It's supposed to differentiate humans from animals. Wisdom. Wisdom is the power of the human. If you get into the supernal wisdom, the infinite wisdom, it's the most esoteric, deep, highest thing that can exist. And that's God. God is wisdom on steroids. God is the greatest, most infinite level of wisdom. The Baal Shem Tov, and in Hasidic teachings, based on Kabbalistic teachings, disagree with that. They don't, and they won't refer to God in his essence as being the level of supernal wisdom, but rather God doesn't have such even that kind of description. Even the description of the highest thing to exist, you can't describe God that way. Because God does not have a description. Not even the description of wisdom. As we spoke a few weeks ago, God just is the essence of truth, of reality, of all. The only real being that we have no concept, no description in our mind and in our world of what that thing could be, other than, we said, necessary existence. It's just pure, truthful existence. So that has a very big difference on their views in our conversation today and in many other views. In our conversation, so the Rambam views God as supernal wisdom. And it's this supernal wisdom which thought about and creates the world. Therefore, in order for beings to attach themselves to God, they do that through the vehicle, through the medium called wisdom. Wisdom here being a paradigm, wisdom being like a metaphor, wisdom being accessing the deepest parts of oneself, one's soul, one's mind, and utilizing one's faculties to transcend the materialism, to transcend one's physicality, to transcend one's natural impulses, animalistic, bestial urges, right? You could live life as an animal, as a beast. You could live life caving into your bodily, physical desires and attractions, and then you're like a beast. But if you choose, as a human being is able to, the path of transcending that and living with wisdom, living in a much more refined space, in a much more transcendent space, you're a truth seeker. You want to be able to discover purpose and what's real and what's genuine and what's authentic and what's purposeful, right? That's the uber human, which we're all supposed to try to do. When you live that way, you connect yourself. That's the way to connect with the supernal wisdom, which is the creative force of our world. So the Rambam says, those people who have accomplished more of that in their life are closer connected in an overt way to the divine providence of their creator, versus those people who are low-level fools, the Rambam calls them, and they pursue their bodily self, their physical self, and they're completely out of touch with a spiritual side, their wisdom, the essence, the truth of their souls and their lives and the world around them, create a blockage between them and the flow of supernal wisdom, creative force to this world. And therefore, in their lives, they're not overtly connected with or influenced by the governance and the orchestration of God. Rather, it appears that they are being treated a bit like the animal realm, meaning let nature take its course. Now, let's talk about nature, for example, for a moment. What is nature, right? Natural order of the universe. Everything is subject to the natural order of the universe. I mean, great people are also. But what is the natural order of the universe? That too was created by God. God created the natural order of the world. The fact that the sun rises and it sets, and the various angles of the skies, creating the many seasons we have, the different temperatures, the different influences, forces in the world, the way science operates, math operates, we're all subject to that. But that didn't just come about on its own. That God created those principles, those formulas, that reality also. But you could be subject to the natural influences, the natural order of the world in a way like animals are, or non-humans are, meaning you're just a part of this physical order of the universe. Or you could be subject to them in a way that it's clear and apparent that everything is being orchestrated by divine providence. The higher level humans are more closely being connected with or being watched over by this divine providence, whereas the lower level humans are not. That's the Rambam's view. The Baal Shem Tov disagreed, because the Baal Shem Tov said God is not supernal wisdom. God is much more than that. God is not limited to that. God is just the essence of what is real and what is true. And in that regard, this essence who creates everything, creates every human alike, and creates all of reality, every existence in this world, which led the Baal Shem Tov to teach that every existence is being subjected to the divine providence, the particular attention, the particular divine providence of the Creator at all times. In a way, just to simplify this, sometimes something happens, something really pathetic in your life, a bad fortune, you lost your job, you missed your flight, the tree fell onto your roof and collapsed your house, whatever, right? Your dog died. All this stuff that happens in our lives, which can make us really disappointed. So the Jewish view is, for sure, this has a meaning, this has a purpose. This didn't just happen because there was a wind and because there was bad weather. Yes, there could be a wind, there could be bad weather, but this didn't have to happen. It happened because it was intended to happen. It's all part of one big plan. True. Sometimes you'll merit to see the plan. Let's say you get a really nice insurance payout and you always wanted to redesign, or your wife wanted to always redesign the kitchen or the roof or whatever. You never had the money, and now you have the money. Maybe that's the blessing. Maybe you missed the flight because if you would have caught it, you would have gone to that meeting and the wrong person was going to be there and it wouldn't have worked out the right way. But thank God you missed it. So now on the phone call the next day, you spoke to the right person. Sometimes we realize and discover the purpose, the reason for something, and it works out for the good. Remember, God is good, so everything he does is for the good. That's a given. We'll talk about more about that another time. But sometimes something happens. Baal Shem Tov, this everybody is everybody is treated in the same way in terms of that perfect planning of every detail in their life. Whether it's more or less visible could also be subject to the level of the person's spiritual consciousness. That's certainly true. But that doesn't take away from the fact that the person is not just a product of the natural order of the universe, but rather it's the hand of God playing everything out at all times. I want to conclude with one final amazing teaching. Do you recall when I first read out the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov? There was one line that I read out there that we didn't explain it. I want to explain it now. And then the way the Lubavitcher Rebbe gave it such a beautiful example that brings everything, it just brings life into this concept. The Baal Shem Tov was teaching that every single detail and aspect of the world and of creation has a purpose, and has a soul, and has intention, and is being planned. Then he added, not only is this particular ox or this particular blade of grass by divine intention, furthermore, he said, the movement of this particular blade of grass affects the creation as a whole, allowing God's intent in the entire creation to come to fulfillment. It's much more than what we've been saying. It's not just that God decides whether this blade of grass should blow this way or that way, whether this leaf should flow there or flow there. It's more than that. The decision of God, the reason why it's blowing this way or that way, is because this decision is affecting every other decision in the universe. Remember, the CEO is not paying attention to, let's talk about your particular job and design it your way, without thinking of how it's going to affect the rest of the company, the budget, the culture, the scheduling. No. When you want to move or change one piece, you have to figure out how that piece is appropriate, but then you have to figure out, and how does that fit in with the rest of the picture? How does that enhance the scheduling, the timing, the culture, the everything of the rest of the company? Everything is intertwined with each other. Every human is intertwined with each other, but not just humans. Every existence, every particular part of creation. The way this thing grows, the way this thing dies, the way this thing moves, affects the entire universe. It's all part of one grand purpose, one grand intention in this creation. Which makes us pay attention to details on such a powerful, awesome level, whether it's plucking that leaf, as we mentioned earlier, or anything, a person you meet, a circumstance that happens, you went the wrong way, right? The other day, I was visiting someone in their office, and they moved offices about a year ago or 2 years ago. And I've been to their new office many, many times, but I was driving to their office the other day, and I have no idea why, but I drove to the wrong office. I got really nervous because I was coming late to the meeting. At that place, and I only thought all about this later, as I'm driving out, I'm really upset at myself. I went to the wrong car park. Now I've got to drive all the way out, go down 3 floors, drive it. As I'm driving out, there was a lady there who was helping the cars go through. And so I pulled down my window and I said, the cars were stalled a little bit. So I just started a little conversation with her. I said, hey, how are you? Thank you for your help. She was blown away. She's like, it's so nice of you to start a conversation with me. I see so many cars go by and people maybe wave, but no one ever talked to me. I'm so happy that you opened the window and talked to me, she tells me. I said, you're welcome. I do that often. I like to, wherever I can. And then later, I thought about this. Why did I go the wrong way? Why did God want me to come late to the meeting? It was okay that I was late, but because maybe I got to cheer up somebody. Unplanned by me, but somebody planned it all. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe writes as follows. Listen to this. The metaphor of a homemaker. In Hebrew, we say akeret habayit, the founder of the home, the bedrock of the home. Often, it's the mother or the wife, and it could be the husband. Whoever it is the bedrock of the home. A perfect homemaker oversees every single detail in their home. They make sure that every item is in its right place and serving its appropriate purpose. Moreover, each item in the home is part of and contributes to the entire goal of the home. No item is ever unnecessary or superfluous. Let's analyze this. Let's break this down. This is a wonderful lesson in space management of our homes, right? All of our homes are so cluttered and we have so much stuff and nowhere to put them and disorganized. And there are big businesses today of people who are going to tidy up your home and clean up your garage and your pantry and your bedroom. And here's the idea. You want to create a perfect home? A perfect home has a goal. The goal is, who are we? What do we need? What are we doing? What do we want to be? Answer those questions for your home, for your family. Big questions. Based on that, what do we have in our home? What do we buy? What do we use? What do we need? And the things we have, everything in the home has to have its right place. Okay, this is really important when it comes to home cleanliness and organization. You see this pen? Where does it belong? It has to have a place. If it doesn't have a place, I'm going to find it somewhere else in the house at some point. So we know where the pen belongs because every house has that drawer that if you want to find the pen and the battery and the rubber band and your missing pair of socks, you're going to find it in that drawer. Not a good thing. It has to have its place. The pen has its place. The ball has its place. The book has its place. The fork has its place. The light bulb, anything in your home has to have a place. That's the first thing you need to figure out when you're trying to organize your home. And its place is its right place, not we're going to dump it here for now. No. Make sure we know where its right place is, where it belongs, where it can be easily accessed. If it's needed, we'll remember where it is. So first of all, everything has its place. Second of all, what do we have in our home? We have those things which we need. We have those things which serve a purpose in our home. If something is not serving a positive purpose in our home, it is not needed, because based on the identity of our home, the goals of our home, it is just not playing a role. Get rid of it. You don't need it. It's wasting space and therefore cluttering your home and creating a mess in your home and in your mind and in your atmosphere. You know what they say, if you haven't worn it in 6 months or 3 years, get rid of it. Some of us are not so good at that. We love to hold on to things. I love to hold on to papers and shtick that I found 5 years ago. So my great-grandchildren will find it one day. So here's a lesson. It has to serve a purpose and it has to have a place. Now, the next deeper idea is that this item that has its place and it's in my home because it's serving a purpose, because it is a product of or a need for whatever our family goal is. Therefore, its existence in my home is relevant to and improves the entire culture of my home and every other thing that exists in my home, because they're all part of the same goal and the same story. My most expensive watch or couch or dining room table or large TV set, together with the battery or the small change of light bulb or the fridge filter on the shelf in the garage, they're all playing the role. Not only their own individual role, but the role of my home, my palace. So they're all helping each other. They're all supporting each other. They all impact each other. And if one piece is missing that needs to be there, everything and everybody suffers. And that's how it is in this world. This world is God's home. In God's home, everything that exists, it's because it's necessary to exist. If it's not necessary, whether it's a human or an animal or a plant or whatever, if it's not necessary, if it doesn't have a role to play, it would not exist. No need. Get rid of it. There's no clutter in God's world. Sometimes we look at a person, sometimes even ourselves, or a thing, and we challenge and we question why, what for. King David asked the question. He saw a spider and he said, why would you have a spider like this, a scary, dangerous spider in your world, oh God? And then God, one day, he was running away from his son Avshalom, and he entered a cave. But Avshalom's going to find him in the cave, and this spider came along and webbed a web over the cave. So Avshalom recognized that it's impossible anybody, his father, went in to hide in that cave because the web is just very, why would it be there? And then he said, now I understand the importance of the spider. Everything has a purpose. Even the cockroaches or the termites or whatever it is that we don't like, the weeds in your garden, they serve a purpose. Maybe the purpose is to get rid of them, and you'll decide if you need them or you don't need them. And so everything serves a purpose. No, there's no mistakes. I'm not a mistake, and you're not a mistake. If I'm alive today, please God, I'll be alive tomorrow. It's for a purpose. And therefore, I got a lot to get done. I've got to be very appreciative and grateful for the life that I have. And I carry that responsibility. At the same time, more than that, my existence is relevant to the entire existence of the world. And so is yours, and so is that blade of grass. Everything is part of this picture. The way we interact with each other, the way we deal with each other, the way we view something that seems so casual and seems so insignificant, it's not. It's all tied in together. This is the amazing view of the Baal Shem Tov. And this is the view that I live by, which is pretty dominant, especially in the spiritual Hasidic worlds and many others as well. And when you live this way, life is unbelievable. For the good, the bad, the ugly, everything in between. It's all part of a plan. And sometimes I'll figure it out, and sometimes I won't, but it doesn't matter because I know. I know that as I go along my life, planning what I can, being as responsible as I can, but all the time curveballs coming into my schedule, into my path, into my journey, into my way, the bumps, the obstacles. Look into it. Don't ignore it. Work with it. Appreciate it. Maybe it's bringing you to places that you didn't plan, but somebody else planned for you for your good. So that's hashgacha-pratis, divine providence, and particular attention of divine providence. My friends, thank you for joining us. A lot to take away, a lot to think about, and we return next week, same time, same place, for our next big Jewish idea. God bless you.